right. Essentials of research design. Some of this I'm going to go through out there. I know for many of you, some of this will be a review. I just want to make sure we have all the information out there and then kind of connect the dots a little bit in a way that hopefully is helpful to all of you. I want to start with some terminology here. So these are words, of course, you're probably familiar with, but I want to make sure we're clear on the definitions and what overlaps and what doesn't. Anyway, let's start at the top there. So study, experiment, and research. These tend to be used very interchangeably. By definition, an experiment is going to be a situation where you manipulate an independent variable and randomize the selection, rather randomize the assignment, excuse me. But we tend to use these interchangeably. So an experiment, a research study, a study, these tend to be just overall synonymous words. Subjects, participants, or respondents, once again, these are all synonymous as well. Apparently there's a current movement where people say we shouldn't call them subjects because it's derogatory somehow or demeaning. I'm not sure what the argument is for that, but those all mean the same thing essentially. The control group versus the experimental group. So once again, going with the experimental design in the first bullet point there, a control group is a group that gets nothing. All right, so let's say, for example, I wanted to look at how caffeine impacts test scores in statistics, right? So what I might do is I might have an experiment where 20 of my students are the control group, 20 of my students are the experimental group. The control group in this study would get no coffee, right? They would be basically my baseline. They're the group that I'm trying to compare against, right? Whereas my experimental group are going to be the group that gets the coffee. So maybe I get them a venti Starbucks that they drink before the exam and then take the exam. So in this case, the control group gets nothing. The experimental group gets the what's called a manipulation, right? Random selection and random assignment are not the same thing. This is why they're on separate bullet points. Make sure you're clear on this. So random selection, when you're randomly selecting, you're selecting who will be part of the study. And it's just as it says, random, right? When you're selecting the participants, this is random selection, and this should come first, okay? Random assignment is the second phase, and this is where you randomly place someone in either the control group or the experimental group. So using my coffee example a second ago, it would not be good methodology to let people pick which group they want to be in. Say, oh, I love coffee, I'll be in this group, or I hate coffee, I'll be in that group. That's not good methodology. What I need to do is randomly assign people to either the coffee condition, experimental, or the non-coffee condition, control, right, randomly. And that's where this comes in. So phase 1 is random selection, phase 2 is random assignment. And this is how you move your participants where they need to be. A major distinction I want to draw here is findings versus conclusions. Findings are going to be what's found in chapter 4. This is the actual data, the research analysis, the stats. Do not mess with the findings. Do not argue against the findings. The findings are objective, right? However, conclusions, which you find in chapter 5 or place in chapter 5, right, are going to be subjective interpretations of the data, right? So if you're trying to refute somebody's research or argue against somebody's research, don't mess with the findings, because unless they lied about the data, that's objective, right? Go for the conclusions. Okay, and just kind of keep that in mind. As you write chapter 4, findings go in chapter 4, conclusions go in chapter 5. So as the researcher, what are our major tasks? What are we trying to do? I don't know why I put transitions on all my slides. To begin with, we're trying to test a hypothesis or hypotheses, right? So you want to make sure that whatever you're hypothesizing, your data, or your methodology is designed to effectively test that, right? Kind of an if-then statement. If I do A, then B will happen, right? And of course, we're always looking for how variables interact, right? Caffeine and test scores, right? Vaccines and viruses. This is essentially what happens, whether it be biomedical research, as they're doing, seem to be doing in the picture, or psychological research like you do for your thesis. This is essentially science 101, right? What we're trying to do is reduce, it says eliminate, that's not possible. Reduce other variables, confound variables. We've already talked about confounds, I'm sure you're familiar with them. What you're trying to do is always reduce the number of confounds that might impact the study, right? So in your coffee test scores one, you might say, okay, nobody drink any coffee before they come to class. Because if somebody's already had 20 ounces of coffee and you give them another 20 ounces, then essentially they've had twice as much as you expected them to. Or if somebody's in the control condition and they've already had 20 ounces of coffee, now they really actually are in the control condition, but with the amount of caffeine of the experimental condition. So you really want to try and reduce the confounds as much as possible so that there's not any kind of background interference in your study. And then this last point, and I try and emphasize this any time I get a chance for somebody to listen to me, what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide support or evidence for our given hypothesis, never proof. We're not seeking proof, right? Just because I produce a study that says A causes B, that doesn't mean that I've proven anything, because someone else might do a similar study and find that in fact A does not cause B, right? So we're never seeking proof, we're simply looking for evidence or support. I equate research to faith, right? I'm not looking for proof that God exists. I know that God exists, right? And I find support or evidence of existence all around me, right? So I'm not ever looking for proof. I have faith in what I believe, and I'm looking for evidence or support of what I believe, right? Same kind of notion, not apples to apples, but a close parallel. So some things that I want you to keep in mind, right? And I'm going to go ahead and tell you what textbooks will tell you, and I'm going to very politely refute some of it, right? So when we're designing research, we need to operate, according to our textbook, need to operate under the principle of parsimony, right? Which is basically keep it simple, stupid. If you've ever heard of that acronym, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, right? It's also referred to as Occam's razor, the principle of simplicity. Basically, the simplest explanation is best, right? And that's what hardcore researchers / scientists will tell you. I'm going to disagree, especially in something like psychology, because if you've ever been around a person or are a person yourself, you'll understand that there's nothing simple about human thought or emotion or behavior. None of that is simple, right? So I really disagree with the idea of parsimony, particularly in the behavioral sciences, because that's not how humans operate. So our research shouldn't operate that way either. What I would recommend is the second one, plausible rival hypotheses. This is good research, and in fact, I think this is just good thinking, right? So there might be several explanations, and they might all be equally complex, but they might also be equally valid, right? So, as a Christian, I believe that God created all of this, but there's this ongoing debate and kind of friction of the idea of evolution, strict evolution, naturalism, right, versus the idea of divine creationism or intelligent design, or whatever you want to call it, right? So there's this kind of like so. And for many people, they say it's that or that, right? Plausible rival hypotheses would say, you know what, it could be either one. It's okay to have different perspectives, right? And this is the way, if you're truly a scientist, I think this is the way you should be. Getting a little preachy here, I apologize. But moving on to that third point, as I've already said, data findings are objective, right? Chapter 4 is objective. You haven't interpreted anything yet. You're simply just reporting. Chapter 5 is where the conclusions can be found, and this is where the interpretation comes in, right? And once again, not bad. It's not like it's a negative thing, but they're going to be more subjective. So kind of keep those two in mind. So let's talk about what good research design should look like. If you were to come up with a cookbook for good research design, I picked one of my wife's favorite cookbooks here to use as an example, right? So things that a good research should include, right? Large sample size. We've talked about this in a previous module. I think it was module 3 that we kind of outlined this, maybe 4. I can't recall. Basically, your sample size could always be larger, right? And you always want to keep in mind how large is your sample size in comparison to the population that you're gathering it from. So if your population is small, the sample size, of course, will be small. But if there's a large population, then it's more justifiable to draw a large sample. So as large as you can get, as large as feasible. Random selection is important. I would actually recommend your study have both random selection and random assignment. Not always possible, particularly, for example, if you're comparing men and women, because you can't randomly assign them. They're either men or women, and they find their own groups, right? But those are both going to be good components to have in your research. Pilot testing is, once again, kind of optional. You don't have to have it, but it is a good skill. Sorry, my cat came out of nowhere. It's a good component to have, right? So having a run through the instrumentation, having a run through the data in a small scale before you go into a larger research study. Obviously, you want to have a good, strong theoretical basis. This is why you write a lit review, right? Chapter 2 is devoted to saying, this is my theoretical basis, this is why it's valid, this is why I'm going to use it. Second to last point there, thorough, purposeful analysis. You want to know what you are looking for in your data. You can't simply just start running things. Oh, I'll use a correlation, or I'll use a t-test, or whatever. You want to make sure that you know exactly what you're looking for and how to look for it. Right? So before you even get your data, you want to start with a good design so you know, okay, when the data comes in, this is what I'm running, this is what I'm hoping to see. Right? A thorough but purposeful analysis. Right? Not fishing with dynamite. And then the last one there, unbiased supported conclusions. Once again, going to chapter 5. It says unbiased. You're going to try and be as unbiased as possible. Can you truly be unbiased? No, because we're human beings with strong opinions and we're flawed and blah, 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 blah. We all are, right? However, you want to make sure whatever conclusions you provide to the reader are supportable and show as little bias as possible, right? And keep in mind, by the way, if the data indicates that you were wrong in your hypothesis, that's okay. That's okay. There's no need to say, well, I was wrong, but barely. No, don't justify it. Say that you were wrong, but talk about the conclusions that indicates, right? There's nothing wrong with being wrong in your hypotheses. What is wrong is trying to justify a false hypothesis, right? So make sure that you follow this sort of layout. If your study has these things, there's a very strong argument that will make for excellent research and ultimately a very, very strong thesis.